The first bullet I ever dodged came with a warning whistle. The email that ended my marriage arrived without a sound. I stared at my phone's cracked screen inside a crowded communications tent in Kandahar, the desert heat making it hard to breathe as the words blurred before my eyes. Let's be adults about this. The subject line alone told me everything I needed to know. Melanie had always been fond of that phrase whenever she wanted to shut down an argument. In our 11 years of marriage, being an adult meant whatever was convenient for her at the moment. 6,000 miles from home, surrounded by the constant hum of military operations, I read how my life was being dismantled paragraph by paragraph. I was no longer a husband. According to the attached legal documents, I might soon no longer be a father either. Sarge, your time's almost up. Private Ramirez nodded toward the line of soldiers waiting for their brief window of internet access. I nodded back, unable to form words as I scrolled through Melanie's email one more time. Due to your prolonged absences and the emotional distance created by your military career, I've decided to file for divorce. I've met someone who can be present in my life. I'm requesting full custody as your PTSD and combat-related trauma make you potentially unstable around the children. The words were so sterile, so calculated. Not once did she mention our son Jackson's upcoming baseball tournament or our daughter Emma's piano recital, events I'd promised a video call into despite the time difference. Not once did she acknowledge that this was my 6th deployment, my 6th time leaving behind everything I loved to serve a purpose greater than myself. I closed the email, handed back the tablet to the communications officer, and walked out into the blinding Afghan sun. No tears, no outburst, just a single word that escaped my lips. Okay. I'd always been good at war, the disciplined waiting, the strategic planning, the ability to remain calm when everything inside you is screaming. These weren't just skills I'd learned as a staff sergeant. They were how I'd survived growing up with an alcoholic father and a mother who disappeared when I was 9. What Melanie never understood was that being quiet wasn't the same as being absent. I observed. I calculated. I protected. 3 months before my deployment, I'd noticed the changes. The new perfume, the extra hours at her marketing job, the sudden password changes on her phone, the way she angled her screen away when I entered a room. I didn't confront her, not because I was afraid, but because confrontation without evidence was just emotion without purpose. Instead, I spoke privately with Lucinda, our longtime nanny who had been with us since Jackson was born 8 years ago. I'm not asking you to spy, I told Lucinda over coffee while Melanie was at a client meeting on a Saturday. I just need someone I trust to make sure the kids are okay while I'm gone. Lucinda, a retired school teacher with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, had simply nodded. You don't need to explain, Daniel. I've seen enough marriages to know when something's wrong. She agreed to keep me updated about the children's well-being. We set up a private email address that wouldn't raise flags if Melanie checked our accounts. It wasn't about catching my wife. It was about protecting my children. The first report came 2 days after the divorce email. Then another. Then another. Photos of empty pizza boxes, while the kids wore the same clothes 3 days running. Screenshots of Melanie's Instagram posts, rooftop bars, yacht parties, champagne brunches, while time-stamped security footage from our home system showed she hadn't returned for over 24 hours. Voice recordings of my daughter asking when Daddy was coming home and Melanie snapping, "He chose his stupid war over us, Emma. Get used to it." When Lucinda was abruptly fired 4 months into my deployment, she didn't stop. She'd befriended our next-door neighbor and kept receiving updates. By then, Melanie had moved the kids into her new boyfriend's luxury penthouse downtown. My children were sharing a room while Melanie and Richard, a hedge fund manager with 3 previous divorces, occupied the master suite. My commanding officer noticed the change in me during those months. Not a decline in performance. If anything, I became more focused, more precise. but something had hardened in me that even combat hadn't managed to solidify. "Whatever you're carrying, Reeve, don't let it consume you," he said after a particularly grueling mission. "No, sir," I replied. "I'm just compartmentalizing." What I didn't tell him was that I was methodically planning the most important tactical operation of my life. I returned stateside in February, 6 months after receiving that email. The divorce had been finalized in my absence. Melanie had requested and received temporary full custody based on my unavailability and vague allegations about my mental state. Her lawyer had painted a convenient picture of a traumatized soldier unfit for civilian life, much less parenthood. I didn't go home. Our house, my house, the one I'd bought with my military savings and renovated with my own hands, had been sold as part of the settlement. Instead, I rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment near my children's school and hired Vivian Sato, a family lawyer who'd represented several military members in my unit over the years. "They exploited your deployment to fast-track everything," Vivian said as she reviewed my case in her office. "It's disgusting but not uncommon. What is uncommon is the evidence you've gathered." I'd spent the last 6 months of deployment organizing every piece of information Lucinda had sent. Text messages, photos, videos, financial records showing how Melanie had drained our joint accounts weeks before filing, social media posts contradicting her court statements about her availability and lifestyle. "This is extraordinarily thorough," Vivian remarked, looking up from the file. "Most clients come to me with emotions. You've brought me ammunition." "I've had time to process the emotions," I said. It wasn't entirely true. I hadn't processed anything. I'd simply locked it away, the way I'd learned to compartmentalize the horrors of war, the betrayal, the lies, the fact that the woman I'd loved since college had described me to the court as damaged goods and a ticking time bomb. "One thing," Vivian said, closing the folder. "The judge assigned to your case, Judge Caldwell, is a no-nonsense type. She doesn't respond to theatrical displays or emotional appeals. Just facts." I nodded. Facts are all I have. The first visitation with my children nearly broke me. We met at a court-appointed supervisor's office, a sterile room with uncomfortable furniture and toys that no child would actually want to play with. Jackson, now 9, entered first, his eyes downcast. Emma, 6, followed, clutching a worn stuffed elephant I'd sent from my first deployment. "Daddy!" Emma broke protocol and ran to me. I caught her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her small arms around my neck. Jackson stayed back, uncertain. He'd grown taller in my absence. His eyes, so much like mine, carried a wariness that no child should have. "Hey, buddy," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mom said you might be different now," he replied cautiously. "Because of the war stuff." The supervisor shifted uncomfortably as I set Emma down and knelt to Jackson's height. "I'm still me," I promised. "I'm still your dad. The only thing different is how much I've missed you." Slowly, he stepped forward and allowed me to hug him. He was stiff at first, then melted against me with a small sob he tried to hide. "Are you coming home?" Emma asked innocently. "How do you explain to a 6-year-old that home doesn't exist anymore?" "I have a new place," I told them, "and I'm working on making it a home for all of us." The 2-hour visitation passed too quickly. I learned that Jackson was struggling in school, that Emma had stopped taking piano lessons, that they both hated Richard's house rules about being quiet and not touching things. When Melanie arrived to pick them up, she stayed in the car, sending her new boyfriend's personal assistant instead. The message was clear. I wasn't even worth facing in person. That night, alone in my apartment with the children's drawings carefully hung on an otherwise bare wall, I allowed myself 10 minutes to feel the full weight of what had been taken from me. 10 minutes to remember the way Emma's voice broke when saying goodbye. 10 minutes to recall the resignation in Jackson's eyes as he was led away. Then I got back to work. War had taught me that emotion without action is just wasted energy. The court date was set for April 15th. In the weeks leading up to it, Melanie's lawyer, a slick operator named Bradley Thornton who specialized in high-profile divorces, filed motion after motion trying to limit what evidence could be presented. They particularly wanted to exclude Lucinda's testimony, claiming she had acted as an unauthorized surveillance agent and had violated Melanie's privacy. Judge Caldwell denied most of their motions, but insisted on reviewing the evidence privately before allowing it in open court. "That's actually good news," Vivian assured me. "She'll see everything without Thornton being able to spin it first." The night before the hearing, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Richard. We should talk before tomorrow gets messy. I'm not the enemy here." I didn't respond. In my experience, anyone who says they're not the enemy is usually preparing to stab you in the back. The courthouse was modern and cold, all glass and steel with none of the gravitas old marble courthouses carried. I arrived early, dressed in my full Class A uniform. Not as a stunt, but because I wanted the court to see exactly who Melanie had described as unstable and dangerous, a decorated staff sergeant with 15 years of honorable service. Melanie arrived 20 minutes late, flanked by Richard and her attorney. She wore a conservative navy dress that I'd never seen before, her blonde hair pulled back in a modest bun, a calculated transformation from the party girl in Lucinda's photos. Richard, tall and silver-haired with the artificial tan of someone who vacationed exclusively at resorts, kept his hand possessively on her lower back. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. She looked away first. The hearing began with Thornton painting a dramatic picture. A fragile woman who had struggled alone during her husband's multiple deployments, who had been emotionally abandoned, who feared for her children's safety around a man potentially suffering from PTSD and anger issues. Mrs. Reeve made the difficult decision to move forward with her life, Thornton told the court, not out of malice, but out of necessity for herself and her children. She is simply asking the court to maintain the current custody arrangement that has provided stability for these children during a tumultuous time. Judge Caldwell, a stern woman with steel gray hair and piercing eyes, listened without expression. When it was Vivian's turn, she didn't attempt to match Thornton's theatrics. "Your Honor, we've provided extensive documentation demonstrating that Ms. Hansen, who has already reverted to her maiden name, has not only been dishonest with this court about the circumstances of this divorce, but has demonstrated a pattern of neglect that should disqualify her from maintaining primary custody." Melanie shifted in her seat as Vivian methodically presented our case. The timestamps showing her absence from the home for 72 consecutive hours while claiming in court documents to be a full-time, dedicated mother. The school records showing Jackson's declining performance and Emma's increased absences. The financial evidence showing how she'd systematically drained accounts in anticipation of the divorce. Then came the videos. Security footage from our home showing the children alone well past midnight, while Melanie's social media simultaneously showed her at clubs. Audio recordings of her mocking my military service to her friends while the children were within earshot. Text messages between her and Richard dating back 14 months. 9 months before my deployment. With each piece of evidence, Melanie's carefully constructed facade cracked further. Richard's posture became increasingly rigid, his hand no longer touching her back. Additionally, Vivian continued, Mrs. Hansen claimed in her filing that Staff Sergeant Reeve had no involvement in the children's daily lives due to his military commitments. Yet we have documentation of daily video calls when connectivity allowed, educational materials he prepared in advance for each deployment, and recorded messages he left for the children to play each night before bed. Judge Caldwell interrupted only once, when Thornton attempted to object to the admission of text messages between Melanie and Richard. "Mr. Thornton, these messages were obtained from the family computer that remained in the marital home and was accessible to both parties. Your objection is overruled. The final blow came when Lucinda took the stand. At 72, with her impeccable appearance and straightforward manner, she made a compelling witness. I worked for the Reeve family for 8 years, she testified. During that time, I observed Staff Sergeant Reeve to be an attentive, patient father who maintained consistent routines and emotional support despite his military obligations. In the months following his last deployment, I observed Ms. Hansen's behavior change dramatically. She described finding the children unfed at 9 p.m., discovering Emma attempting to cook for herself at age 6, and Jackson wearing the same clothes to school 3 days in a row because the laundry hadn't been done. When I expressed concern, Lucinda continued, Ms. Hansen terminated my employment without notice and informed me I was not to contact the children again. Throughout Lucinda's testimony, I kept my eyes forward, my posture military straight. Only once did I allow myself to look at Melanie. Her face had gone white, her carefully applied makeup now emphasizing rather than concealing her distress. Richard was no longer seated beside her. Somewhere during Lucinda's testimony, he had slipped out of the courtroom. When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Caldwell called a 30-minute recess. I remained in the courtroom while Melanie hurried out, presumably to find Richard. Vivian touched my shoulder. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just ready for this to be over." "Whatever happens," she said, "you've done everything right. Your restraint through all of this has been remarkable." It wasn't restraint. It was training. In combat, you learn that emotional outbursts get people killed. You learn to channel everything into precision and purpose. When court resumed, Richard's seat remained empty. Melanie kept checking her phone until Judge Caldwell instructed her to put it away. The judge's expression gave nothing away as she delivered her ruling. This court has reviewed extensive evidence regarding the care and custody of minor children Jackson and Emma Reeve. It is clear to this court that significant misrepresentations have been made regarding Staff Sergeant Reeve's fitness as a parent. She looked directly at Melanie. "Ms. Hansen, the court finds your testimony and that of your counsel to be contradicted by substantial evidence. Your characterization of the defendant as absent and unstable appears to be without merit and potentially defamatory." She then turned to me. "Staff Sergeant Reeve, the court is impressed by your methodical documentation and restraint throughout these proceedings. The evidence suggests you have maintained consistent involvement in your children's lives, despite professional challenges that would make such involvement difficult for most parents." The ruling came down like rifle fire. Primary physical custody awarded to me, with Melanie granted supervised visitation twice monthly pending completion of parenting classes and a psychological evaluation. She would pay child support based on her marketing salary and the substantial settlement she'd received in the divorce. The children would remain in their current school, but would live with me effective immediately. Melanie gasped audibly. "Your Honor, you can't—" "Ms. Hansen," Judge Caldwell interrupted sharply, "the court's decision is final. If you wish to appeal, you may discuss that with your attorney. This hearing is adjourned." As we rose for the judge's exit, I caught a glimpse of Melanie frantically texting, her hands shaking. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a soldier's calm after completing a mission. Outside the courtroom, Vivian was jubilant. "This is better than we hoped for. Judge Caldwell rarely modifies custody so completely without a transition period." I nodded, already focused on the next steps. "How soon can I pick up the children?" "The order goes into effect immediately. We can have the sheriff's deputy accompany us to the residence this afternoon." As we discussed logistics, Melanie burst out of the courtroom, her composure completely abandoned. Her eyes were wild, mascara smeared beneath them. "Daniel!" she shouted across the hall. "You can't do this! The children need their mother!" Several heads turned. Vivian stepped forward protectively, but I gently moved her aside. "Melanie," I said quietly, approaching her but stopping at a respectful distance. "This isn't the place. Richard's not answering his phone. she hissed, lowering her voice but unable to control its tremor. "What did you say to him?" "I never spoke to him." "Liar! He's gone. He said he needed space to think." Thornton appeared behind her, placing a restraining hand on her arm. "Melanie, not here. We'll file an appeal." She shook him off. "You promised me we'd win. You said his military status wouldn't matter." I turned to walk away, Vivian beside me. Behind us, Melanie's voice rose again. "Daniel, please, I made a mistake, but don't take my children." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "They were always our children, Melanie, not just yours. I'll have them ready to see you for your first supervised visit." It was the most emotional thing I'd said throughout the entire process, and yet I delivered it with the same steady tone I'd used to report mission status. Picking up Jackson and Emma from the penthouse that afternoon was surreal. A sheriff's deputy accompanied us to enforce the court order. Richard was nowhere to be seen. The children were confused, Jackson suspicious and Emma tearful, as Melanie alternated between cold fury and desperate pleading. "Mom's really upset," Jackson whispered as we packed his things. "She said you tricked the judge." "The judge saw evidence of what's been happening," I explained gently. "I know this is confusing, but I promise you'll still see your mom." Emma clung to me, uncertain but relieved. "Can I bring Elephant?" "Of course. And anything else you want." Melanie stood in the doorway of the penthouse's second bedroom that the children shared, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This isn't over, Daniel. Richard will be back, and we'll appeal." I nodded without engaging further, helping the children with their suitcases and favorite possessions. The deputy maintained a professional distance, but kept a watchful eye on the proceedings. As we prepared to leave, Melanie's phone rang. Her face lit up as she checked the screen, and she hurried into the master bedroom to take the call. When she emerged minutes later, her expression had shifted from hope to devastation. "Everything okay?" the deputy asked with professional courtesy. "Fine," she snapped. Then to me, "Richard is ending the lease. I have 30 days to vacate." I nodded again, absorbing the information without comment. Jackson looked up at me, then back at his mother, his young face showing more understanding than a child his age should have. "Ready to go?" I asked the children. Emma nodded, taking my hand. Jackson hesitated, then walked over to Melanie and gave her a quick hug. "Bye, Mom," he said softly. "I'll see you soon?" She clutched him tightly, then composed herself with visible effort. "Of course, honey. This is just temporary. Just a mix-up." In the elevator down to the parking garage, Emma asked the question I'd been prepared for. "Is Mom in trouble?" I chose my words carefully. "Mom made some choices that didn't put you and Jackson first. The judge decided you should stay with me for now while Mom works on some things." "Does she not want us anymore?" Jackson's voice was small but direct. "She does want you," I assured him. "Very much. And you'll still see her. But right now, this is what's best for everyone." The drive to our new apartment was quiet. I'd prepared their rooms meticulously. Jackson's with his favorite sports teams represented, Emma's with the butterfly theme she'd loved since she was 4. I'd even recreated the glow-in-the-dark star pattern on Emma's ceiling, matching the exact constellation from her old room. When we arrived, I gave them space to explore while I ordered pizza, their favorite Friday tradition that had apparently been discontinued in the penthouse because Richard preferred sushi. That night, after dinner and ice cream and a movie they chose, I tucked them into their new beds. Emma fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the emotional day. Jackson stayed awake longer, asking questions I answered as honestly as age-appropriate boundaries allowed. "Were you mad at Mom?" he finally asked as his eyes grew heavy. "I was sad," I told him truthfully. "Sad that things changed in a way that hurt you and Emma. But you didn't yell or anything, even today when Mom was really upset." "Yelling doesn't fix problems, buddy." He nodded, processing this with a child's simple wisdom. "I'm glad you're back, Dad." "Me too. Get some sleep now." I sat in the living room afterward, the apartment quiet except for the occasional car passing outside. My phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. "This is cruel, Daniel, using the children to punish me." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that the court hadn't already established. 10 minutes later, another text arrived. "Richard says I need to find my own place. Did you contact him?" Again, I didn't respond. Whatever was happening between Melanie and Richard was their business, not mine. A third text, an hour later. "Please just talk to me." I turned off my phone. The weeks that followed established a new routine. I'd arranged my military duties to avoid deployments for the next year, taking an instructor position at the nearby base. The children settled into life with me. Jackson's grades improved, and Emma started piano lessons again with a teacher who lived in our building. Melanie missed her first scheduled visitation, sending a text claiming illness. She made the second one, arriving with gift bags and a forced cheerfulness that faded as the children maintained a cautious distance. The court-appointed supervisor noted in her report that Melanie seemed more interested in gathering information about our living situation than engaging meaningfully with the children. 3 months after the custody hearing, I received an email from Richard, the first and only direct communication I would ever have with him. "Sergeant Reeve, I want to clarify my role in recent events. When Melanie and I began our relationship, she represented herself as essentially single, claiming you had agreed to divorce after your deployment. She described a loveless marriage maintained only for appearances. I now understand this was not the case. While this doesn't excuse my involvement, I feel you should know that many of Melanie's claims about your character and behavior have proven to be untrue in other contexts as well. I've discovered misrepresentations about her financial situation, her professional background, and her relationships with previous partners. I am not seeking absolution, merely providing information that may be relevant to your ongoing custody arrangements. I have ended all contact with Melanie and have no intention of involving myself further in these matters. Respectfully, Richard Westfield." I forwarded the email to Vivian without comment and continued with my day. A week later, Melanie was late for her visitation. When she finally arrived, the supervisor noted signs of intoxication and refused to allow the visit to proceed. Melanie created a scene that resulted in security being called. The incident was documented and submitted to the court. Through it all, I maintained the steady routine the children needed. I never spoke negatively about Melanie in their presence. When they asked difficult questions, I redirected without lying. When Melanie failed to appear for visits, I helped them process their disappointment without feeding their anger. 6 months after gaining custody, I received notice that Melanie had failed to complete her court-ordered parenting classes and psychological evaluation. Her visitation rights were suspended pending compliance. Jackson and Emma received the news with a resignation that broke my heart. They had already adjusted their expectations. One evening in October, as I was helping Emma with homework at our kitchen table, the doorbell rang. It was unusual. We rarely had unannounced visitors, and friends knew to text first. I opened the door to find Melanie standing there, swaying slightly. She'd lost weight, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a wrinkled blouse. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I need to see my children," she said without preamble. "Melanie, you know there's a process." "Process?" She laughed bitterly. "You've taken everything, Daniel. My children, my relationship, my friends." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "Did you know I lost my job? That I had to move into a studio apartment? That my own parents won't speak to me after seeing those videos you showed the court?" Behind me, I heard a small gasp. Emma stood in the hallway, wide-eyed. "Emma, honey, go finish your homework," I said calmly. "I'll be right there." She hesitated, then retreated. I stepped into the hallway, partially closing the apartment door behind me. "You're not supposed to be here, Melanie. You've been drinking." "So what if I have?" Her voice cracked. "You've destroyed my life. You were supposed to be the broken one, the damaged soldier with PTSD. But you're fine, aren't you? You've always been fine." I studied her face. This woman I'd once loved enough to build a life with, to create children with. There was no satisfaction in seeing her fall apart, only a deep sadness for what had been lost. "I'm taking the children to my parents for Thanksgiving next month," I said quietly. "If you complete the court requirements by then, we can arrange for you to see them there. Supervised, but in a family setting." She stared at me, searching for something, mockery, maybe, or triumph. Finding neither, her shoulders slumped. "Why are you being reasonable? After everything?" "Because it's not about us anymore. It's about them." Melanie leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "I did love you once, you know, before everything got so complicated." I nodded. "I know. Go home, Melanie. Get help. Do what the court ordered. The children need their mother, but they need her whole and healthy." She pushed away from the wall, dignity reasserting itself momentarily. "You always were better than me, Daniel. That was the real problem." As she walked toward the elevator, I called after her. "I'll have Vivian contact your lawyer about Thanksgiving. If you're serious." She didn't turn around, just raised a hand in acknowledgement as the elevator doors closed. Inside the apartment, I found both children sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to be absorbed in homework, but obviously listening. "Was that Mom?" Jackson asked directly. "Yes." "Is she okay?" I sat down with them, considering my response carefully. "She's having a hard time right now, but she loves you both very much." "Is she coming back?" Emma's voice was small. "Not tonight, but maybe for Thanksgiving if some things work out." I looked between their serious young faces. "How would you feel about that?" They exchanged glances, having one of those silent sibling conversations that excluded adults. "It would be okay," Jackson finally said. "If she's not yelling and stuff." Emma nodded in agreement. "And if you're there too, Daddy." "I'll always be there," I promised. It was the one promise I knew I could keep. Melanie did complete her requirements before Thanksgiving. She attended the holiday at my parents' home, subdued, but making a visible effort with the children. The court-appointed supervisor remained discreetly present, but the day passed without incident. As months became a year, then two, Melanie gradually rebuilt a relationship with Jackson and Emma. She never regained full custody. Her documented instability and the children's preference to remain with me weighed heavily in continuing court evaluations. But she achieved unsupervised weekend visitation after 18 months of compliance with all court orders. Richard disappeared from our lives entirely, though I occasionally heard his name in financial news. Melanie eventually found work at a smaller marketing firm and moved to a more comfortable apartment. Whether she dated again, I neither knew nor cared. The children thrived. Jackson joined the baseball team. Emma excelled at piano and discovered a talent for science. I remained in the military but transitioned to a role that eliminated the need for long deployments. My parents, who had always been distant with Melanie, became regular fixtures in our lives. As for me, the war I'd fought on two fronts, both overseas and at home, had changed me. I was quieter, more observant, more deliberate in my choices and commitments. I dated occasionally, but approached relationships with careful consideration of how they would affect the children. The silent tactical warfare that had defined the darkest period of my life gave way to an unexpected peace. Not because I had destroyed my enemy, but because I had protected what mattered most. 3 years after that fateful email in Kandahar, Jackson asked me a question as I drove him home from baseball practice. "Dad, are you still mad at Mom for what happened?" I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, 12 years old now, his face losing its childish roundness, his eyes carrying the perceptiveness that had always been there. "No," I answered honestly. "I let that go a long time ago." He nodded, processing. "You never really talk about it." "Some battles don't need to be refought in words, buddy. Mom says you beat her by being quiet," he said. "That your silence was the worst punishment." I pulled into our driveway and turned to face him. "It was never about punishing anyone. It was about protecting you and Emma, and finding the truth. Sometimes the loudest statement is not saying anything at all." He absorbed this with the thoughtful expression that reminded me so much of myself. "I think I get it," he said finally. "It's like Coach says. It's not about making noise, it's about making points." I smiled at the simplicity and accuracy of his analogy. Exactly. As we walked into the house where Emma was practicing piano under the supervision of her new teacher, I realized that the silent war had ended not with destruction, but with reconstruction. We had all been broken, but the pieces had reformed into something different, something that could still function, still grow. The truth hadn't just spoken louder than lies. It had cleared space for a new reality where victory wasn't measured by who lost more, but by what remained standing when the dust settled. And we were still standing. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.